Welcome to I Play, Therefore I Am. In our conversations with extraordinary games industry professionals, we discover their unique career stories, and we also find out about their personal development and philosophical journeys.
This podcast is a co-production of MediaNet, Berlin-Brandenburg, and Now Media, and brought to you fresh from the games capital Berlin, as part of the program MediaNet Games International.
I'm Simon.
I'm Florian, and we will be your hosts for this program.
Gaming meets philosophy. I play, therefore I am.
Hello and welcome to our podcast, I Play, Therefore I Am. This is still new to me. I was almost saying the old name just out of being used to it. So I'm Florian. Welcome back to the podcast. Hello, Simon, my dear co-host. How is life treating you?
Hello, Florian, my dearest of co-hosts. My life is treating me very, very well, and I'm very glad to be here.
Today, our guest is Arthur Protasio, who is from Brazil, but currently lives in Canada. He's a creative director and narrative designer and has founded his own company, Fableware, in 2014. Since then, he has worked on over 20 titles and IPs from different media, including games, TV, VR, and animation, from indie titles to blockbuster IPs. Some of his previous work also includes being a columnist for MTV Brazil and co-creating an interactive TV show, Lazinho con Voce. I hope I didn't butcher that too bad. Welcome, Arthur. How are you doing today?
Hello. Thank you for the introduction. Great to be here, Florian. Great to be here, Simon. I am doing well. I have to admit, it is not a sunny day, and I am a summer person. And right now it is supposed to be summer. So it is a bit of a rainy day, but that is not my mood. I am here for a sunny conversation with both of you and very excited. Thank you for the invitation. This is awesome.
Sweet. Thanks for being here. Also I can feel a hype going around in this conversation already. I can see this will be a good episode. Everybody's ready for it.
I have a motto, and it's a motto that I share, but whenever I share, I share it in the most mindful of ways, explaining that it's not about being on the hype train. It's about just kind of seizing the day, living life to its fullest, but within each person's personality. And my motto is, if you're not hyped, something ain't right. So that's, I don't know, it's like, if I'm excited about something, that's a good sign. If I'm not, it's not that it's a problem. It's just something to be attentive to, just to keep an eye on. And potentially that can lead us to new discoveries. So I am hyped to be here. And I think that's a sign that things are right.
I actually have a motto too. And it's, if you have a piece of cheese, the day's going to be a breeze. But I don't have a piece of cheese right now, so I'm not sure how to feel. So I'm going to like your motto more today. I'm going to stick to yours because I'm hyped, but I don't have cheese.
As a cheeseaholic, I share that. I had never heard that before, but I totally agree with it. Although I do think that breeze would last like 5 minutes because I would just devour the cheese as soon as possible. But the day would be great.
And the day would be great. But then there's also another question about the breeze, which is like the smell. Like if you've got some really smelly cheese, maybe the breeze is going to smell a bit strange also. But I think that's a problem for like the other people that haven't had the cheese. Everybody who's had the cheese, right? Everybody who's had the cheese is going to be in on the breeze. So, yeah, I can't believe you haven't heard that before. It's not like I just made it up.
I think you did.
Not really. Now I can't tell the irony. I'm pretty sure you made it up, or is it not?
I leave this to the discretion of you and the other listeners. I can't comment on this.
Welcome everybody to the Cheese Podcast. Today, our guest is Arthur Cheese Lover Protasio. So can we agree that we all love cheese? Because I think that's the first good. I never thought that this is how our first topic, but I mean, we can keep going with it.
Cheese and music. Choosing music.
I
actually put that in my, depending on how cheerful a bio can be.
Yeah.
Depending on the event, I add at the end that my passion for storytelling, rumor has it that it's only rivaled by my love for cheese and music. So,
Sweet.
Yes.
But coming back to your motto, is that because you said it like, if I'm not hyped, that then like that's maybe something to be aware of, or like is your motto, you just like pretty openly communicated it as like your opening statement. Is that something that you do for the podcast specifically, or do you share that also with others? Like, so your people surrounding you or you work with basically know, hey, if Arthur is not super hyped about stuff, that for us means that, oh, he's not in his normal mode.
Yeah. It's not just for the podcast. This is my natural, stable self. As in, for me, this goes back. Okay, so this is, if it's okay, I'm going to tell a little anecdote that is connected to this motto. And I have a background in law, which in itself brings up lots of other stories. But when I was studying law, I remember having a conversation with some friends in university. And it was just a group of friends, and people were like, oh, what do you aspire to the future? You know, like the sort of philosophical conversation that you have every day when you're at university. But it just happened. People were curious of like, what are you aiming for, or what you want, what do you desire? And I remember seeing there were all kinds of people, right? There were students who were like, I'm in it for the money. Like, as long as I'm studying law, and as long as I'm a very powerful or a successful lawyer, and I have loads of money, and that's where my happiness comes from. And then I remember people also saying, oh, I'm in it because I want to be known as the greatest lawyer of all time, or I want to have like that. People who are seeking the fame and the popularity of it. And again, I think it's amazing. Who doesn't like to be acknowledged for their work? I think that's fascinating. That's totally valid. But I remember that studying law for me personally was quite challenging, because the more I studied it, the more convinced I was that I did not want to pursue that career. And when I had this conversation with this circle of students, these groups of friends, or just fellow students, I came to the realization, and this is what I said. I said, hey, what I desire is to wake up on a Monday and be like, all right, let's do this. Another day of work or whatever it is. It's okay. I'm not going to dread the Sunday. Because I guess for a long, long time, maybe in school mostly, I had this kind of like what we would call like the end of vacation blues, you know, and it's kind of like, no, vacation's almost over, you know, like the summer break is over, or whatever, school break is over. Oh, I got to go back to school. And then, so like that is something that I absolutely abhor, as in I want to, that's not the life that I wish for myself. So and then connecting that with if you're not hyped, something ain't right. It's just because I love parties. I love music. I love being social scenarios. I love talking to people. I love being here right now, talking with both of you. And it's not that, if like, there are obviously so many days where and I like to say that I'm in a pensive mood, but because I'm in a pensive mood, it doesn't mean things are wrong. It just means that it's more of like a self-internal check-in. You know, it's kind of like, hey, how are you feeling today? Well, I don't know. I don't feel typically excited. Well, let's find out why. It's kind of like your own, I don't know, your own therapist. You know, you're just doing, you're constantly evaluating how you're feeling, and not by putting pressure, just by really making sure. I guess it's like, you know, if we were to compare it, we're here to talk about games as well. If we were to think about it, it's kind of like, oh, you've reached a checkpoint in your mission, in your life, in your decade, in your year. Well, now that you've reached this checkpoint, how do you feel about this checkpoint? How are you feeling? Are you feeling good? Are you feeling bad? Are you not as excited as you thought you would be? What's the vibe? So it's really more of a vibe check. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being, and again, even the word hyped, because I know the word hype in the internet, when I say hype, I mean just like being excited, you know, being happy / excited. I am not for the hype, as in the awe.
Yeah, the over exaggeration
whatsoever. Sorry, what was that?
The over sensual, Jesus Christ, sensationalization, is that a word?
Yeah,
like basically,
Yeah. I like, that's it. I am not in favor of hype as the awe that comes without, devoid of any critical thinking or analysis.
Got it. I have a question about that whole episode in your life where you were studying law.
Mm-hmm.
You said that you basically decided that that's not for you. So at that point, did you become an outlaw?
Where's the sound effect when we need it?
Sorry, that was stuck in my head and had been clogging up everything. So yeah, before there was just mush.
Well, but it's an interesting question, and I'm just going to allude to it again. We can dive deeper if that's the case. But
sure,
I was studying law at the same time that in university I was studying a bunch of other topics. So I officially was a law major, but I was pursuing design, I was pursuing psychology, I was pursuing filmmaking, journalism, etc. And it was very interesting because you mentioned, just as a joke, like the outlaw, but in law, I felt like, quote unquote, an outlaw among the law field. And when studying design and other fields,
oh my God, I
felt like this outsider when it came, because people saw me as like, oh, this is the lawyer who likes design. Yeah. And some people saw me as like, this is the designer who's studying law. So it created an interesting divide. And I mean, nowadays I have no issue whatsoever with that. But at the time, it took a little bit of time and just experience in general to show people that, like, hey, just because I'm studying law, it doesn't mean I necessarily want to be a lawyer at a video game studio. It means I can have the knowledge and do other things with it.
It's also funny that in all of this, you said something very, very interesting to me, or which to me is like, I had to smile when you said, oh, we're also here to talk about games. And I love how this podcast has evolved to, oh, we will talk to people who are in games about games. And then some other things might also come up where it's like, oh yeah, we'll talk about whatever cheese law studies, but at some point we might also talk about games. So I just love the evolution of the podcast. And I hope the audience agrees.
And with that being said, I have another question about the previous thing. Also, I'll have you know that as I verbalized, I only got the joke halfway through the thing. In law, outlaw. Very good joke. I indeed missed the sound effect. I didn't even, so very good. Other question. You talked about vibes. I think that's very interesting. It's not an exactly rational term, which I approve of as the local jester. But what are vibes, and how would you, if you would try to explain to somebody how to work with vibes, how would you do that?
Excellent question. I think I've never been asked that question before, and the way I see it, I'm using vibe as sort of like an equivalent to mood. But not just an internal mood, maybe a mood that you can also set for other people. And I think that applies not just in personal, but also in professional life. For example, if you're managing a team and you want people to be on the same, I mean, that's what we always talk about, for example, with establishing a vision. Establishing a vision can be something very creative, but very objective, as in, oh, this is the project we're working on, and this project has, from a visual perspective, this art direction, from a creative or game design perspective, this direction. These are the mechanics we're working on. When it comes to the story, these are the pillars that we're working with, and these are the character arcs, etc. But I do think that when we talk about vibe and mood, and again, it's not just about the mood board that you're thinking for the project. It's about the mood that you're setting, the intentions that you're setting for your team or for your friends or for your just a group of closest people that you like to hang out with. I think it's about making sure. And again, even Simon, going back to your comment of that we're here just to talk about lots of different things, and it could be from law to cheese. And that makes me feel like cozy, comfortable. And for me, that is already setting a mood, setting a vibe, as in I feel comfortable to talk about anything. It can be professional. It can be from my personal life. And I think that's also part of the vibe, as in we're making it clear that this is a moment where you don't feel constrained by certain boundaries. So I guess it's about establishing what is the space that we can inhabit, and obviously space metaphorically, emotionally speaking. I think that's super important. And I think that comes as well with a good deal of ice breaking and conversations. I mean, this is not the first time we're chatting. We talked before this, and even through that process, it's just a little bit easier to reestablish the connection and just continue the vibe, the mood.
Nice.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I also have a funny example, a very simple example, because I've been working with and around vibes for a longer time now, and it's always increasing. And I'm meeting more and more people who are just using vibes as a very common terminology. So I thought would be very funny to like take that apart here a little bit. One, it's like you said, it's like ice breaking and potentially norm and convention breaking or establishing, but just, norms and conventions are very subjective, right? They're like societal norms and conventions and the norms and conventions of your office or something. But then you can just change things also. So, for example, one very simple idea is that I recently worked in a place where it was very normal to like have meetings on the floor. Because it's just good to sit on the floor. You sit differently. You have to move more. You engage your body more. And automatically your conversation is going to be more embodied and not just had with your head and your mouth, because you're like stretching your knees and you're wiggling around on the floor a little bit. And then sometimes we sat on the table together, but then it was the most normal thing to stretch or to, let's say, move from the chair down to the floor and just kneel or something while still like half sitting at the table. And nobody was batting an eye, kind of, because that was just the established vibe. And everybody knew, okay, if Simon is moving around a little bit, then maybe something is working through him. And then maybe he has to like process some feeling or he needs to think with his body a little bit, all of these rather unconventional terms. But then if people around you get that and you establish that as sort of a vibe, then it also invites other people to do that. Just like this classic video where at this festival or this concert, there's like one guy dancing on a grassy slope and everybody's kind of looking at him, and people are maybe like kind of looking at him with a bit of a superiority smirk, and be like, yeah, what's that fool doing? And then one guy is joining him, and not shortly after somebody third and fourth is joining him. And then and then it just takes seconds and everybody's joining him. So it changes from like, that's weird to that's cool. And from what is that guy doing to I want to be a part of that. And so I think, like you said, also establishing a vision, establishing any type of company or endeavor is always pretty much establishing a certain vibe. And it's, you can just do that in smaller senses and maybe in weirder senses. And you can like modify the vibes of a room, or read the vibes of a room and insert yourself in there and blah, blah, blah. There are all sorts of cool things you can do with vibes, I think.
For sure. I totally agree. And I know that video, and not only I know that video, but I am absolutely sure that not in the exact same case, but I have been that person at a music festival, just dancing on my own, just because I'm enjoying the music. I remember that's, and I guess it's not a coincidence that we're talking about vibe, and music is part of the examples and part of the discussion, right? Because it means, to me, it's everything you talked about. It's sharing a message, sharing an intention. And when you sit on the floor, or when you go to, let's say, a wedding, and that place in particular has different lighting, right? Or you go to a restaurant and the lighting is different. The music, the soundtrack that they have maybe in the background is different. You go to another place, you have a soundtrack that maybe isn't in the background. That's the main star. All of this establishes the ambience, the environment that you're in. And it also sends a message, as in what type of experience are you offering to your customer / client / whatever, to people, to audience, right? So I think it's always about what is the mood that you're creating. And through that mood, what is your intention? What is the message? Are you saying, hey, this is a more laid back area, sit on the ground, sit on the floor, just chill, listen to some, I don't know, calm music if there is any? Or is it, no, we need you to stand because when you're standing, you're going to be focused. We know that you're not going to fall asleep. Or is there like dim lighting because it's not going to strain your eyes? You're not going to be, it doesn't feel like you're maybe in a hospital or in a corporate office environment. All of that changes radically. I think, like, honestly, when it comes to changing a room, it doesn't matter if you don't have much of a budget for decoration. Just grab some smart light bulbs and you choose the color of the lighting, use indirect lighting, not ceiling lights, put on different type of music, and you can very quickly change the setting. And I think that's a very good example of, in my opinion, vibe. First of all, because it's connected to the music, but secondly, because you're directly affecting the mood and how people will feel in that environment. You can use the same room to create a horror-like themed experience, or you can use that same room to make it feel very cozy and wholesome.
By the light, and a last comment from me on that, also by the music. I mean, you put music on, and music is literal vibration transfer. It's like literally what it is, right? Voice or music, it's just vibrations. And that also changes how you feel a room. And then I think to understand this, a cool topic for the start, to understand this, you can kind of, if you're like really looking at people in a room, like a team or something, you can like imagine they're a jazz band, and then you can like project what game or instrument they're playing individually. And then you can kind of gauge what the sound of a couple of people in a room is like, the vibe. That might go a bit deep, but I don't know. I like that we're talking about it, so might as well.
Yeah, no, I just totally agree. I think that's a great comparison, thinking of the band, where each person plays their instrument, each person has a role. Of course, that's how teams work. But just as a very quick example, it doesn't even have to be music per se, but just very recently, like, true story happened last week. We have a dog here, and our dog, for some reason, she loves drinking like running water. She had her bowl of water, but she would always wait and sit and look at us, like looking at the tub at the shower, for us to turn on the tub. And then she would drink straight from the faucet, like running water. So we're like, well, she always wants to drink necessarily running water. And it's a dog, not a cat. Typically cats do that. So we got like a little fountain for pets, like a small one, like USB powered. And now we have one, and it's like in her crate, so she can drink from it whenever she wants. She doesn't have to ask for us to turn on the faucet in the bathroom. And the other day I talked to my girlfriend, and I just mentioned, hey, like, now that I hear this constantly running water, I feel like I'm in the Zen garden. You know, I feel like we have just changed, even if slightly, we have just changed the mood or a little bit the setting of the living room, precisely because of the little faucet, the running water faucet, the fountain, the pet fountain that we added to the living room. So again, very small example, but I think every little element helps establishing the vibe, the mood.
This is really funny because I have the same thing for my two cats. And I only live in a one-room apartment. And I have this same thing that when I filled it up quite full with water, then it's like this really zen kind of flowing of water that you almost cannot hear, but it's somewhat in the background. But as soon as there's like not enough water in it, or starting to get too little water, then it starts becoming too loud for me, and then I get super annoyed by it. So I always have to make sure that it's like almost full water every day. Otherwise I go insane. Just sharing.
Yeah. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So I just thought, how the hell do we get back to just introducing you a little bit more? But then I thought, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on this. I've seen quite recently a few, now I'm going on a tangent again when I just was about to reel it in, but I've seen quite a few like series or also podcasts where they will do like half the episode, and then they will just randomly start with the like opening. And it's like, it used to be like a series starts with an opening and then you start the show, or it's like maybe a teaser of a minute and then, but I've had series where, or podcasts where it was like 10 minutes in, then they all started to show the opening credits or the opening theme. Do you know what that's about?
I mean, I don't know exactly what that's about, but I personally love, like, honestly, I love it when you have a cold open, or it doesn't have to be a short cold open, but like it works a lot with TV shows, right? But the movies, for example, movies where you just start watching the movie, and then when it gets to the end, boom, it shows the title card, like right before the credits. There's something, to me, there's something magical about that. And I think it depends on the experience you want to create, but I love it.
So you are on this podcast because that's usually how I introduce somebody, because we met a few years back. We figured it out between us. I think it was in 2017. Mm-hmm. I was working at a company called Threeks back then. I was showcasing a game at Quo Vadis, which is or was a conference happening here in Berlin. I was showcasing a game. You were also showcasing a game. And that's how we got to know each other. But we also found out that you have a long-standing history with German game developers. Let's say you also know my back then boss, Bulas from Threeks.
Shout out to Bulas. Bulas is amazing. To Bulas.
And you were part of a exchange program that was organized by Goethe Institute between back then Germany and Brazil. So that's basically the setting. We've met each other 6-ish years ago for the first time. And we stayed connected. And while I was looking up guests for the new series of this episode, for the new season, I looked for people who are in Canada, because that's one of our new goals for the project that this podcast goes along with, to connect with Canada. And so I thought, why is he in Canada? He is from Brazil, and I pretty much remember back then, I think you were still in Brazil. So tell us a little bit about what happened to Arthur between when I thought he's from Brazil and is in Brazil to now he's in Canada. What have you been up to? What are you doing?
With pleasure. So let's start an episode of Previously on Arthur Protasio. And
everybody knows the show.
Of course. Wasn't that why you subscribed to Netflix and Amazon and everything? Yeah. But
skip intro. No kidding. Please go ahead.
Yeah. It's a fascinating, amazing question, because I said this before and was really happy when you reached out, Florian. And it was great to just show how in life, I think it's, again, don't want to go on a massive tangent, but it goes back to my motto. Like, I was super excited when you reached out, and I'm like, wow, look at this. Like, we had good times back in Berlin when I was there for Quo Vadis, and at the same time, we're now reconnecting with purpose, reconnecting for this show, for the podcast, to discuss lots of things. So it was just really cool how we managed to establish this new conversation. And back then, when we met in Berlin, I was demoing / showcasing Sword Legacy. And that was so long ago, because that was even before we released. Sword Legacy was a tactical RPG that I developed, that I was doing the creative direction for, and we released it back in 2018. So that meant that in Brazil, I was running Fableware, which is my storytelling studio. And Fableware is focused, again, on providing either a narrative design services, narrative design / narrative writing consultancy to clients. And I was doing that from Brazil. Long story short, approach to this is that because of my, personality and also desires, and just, I like traveling, I like exploring. I was at a point where I was very happy with my life in Brazil, but at the same time, I was working a lot with overseas clients from Brazil. Also at that time, I was working at Fableware, managing the company, but at the same time working as a screenwriter for TV Globo. And just for some context, TV Globo is like this massive, huge TV network in Brazil, the largest, and also the second largest TV network in the world when it comes to worldwide revenue. So they're known for huge productions, like not only the novellas or the telenovelas that are typical from Latin America and from Brazil, but in throughout the years, they've also like put out so many TV shows, drama TV shows, and different experiences. And I worked on one of them, which again was a great experience in my professional track record. It was a show that was nominated for the Emmy. And that was even before we met. That was 2014. So I was at the time more connected to TV and film. But the more I worked with Fableware, the more that was connecting me with the rest of the world and less with the focus on the Brazilian market. So throughout this transition, I was already in contact with different people throughout the world, and I was wanting to take this next step, both personally and professionally, in terms of where am I headed next. It's not that I didn't want to stay in Brazil, but it's that I wanted something new. It's that I wanted to explore new possibilities. It's that I wanted to explore new cultures. It's just, I love adventures, and I wanted to go on an adventure, and I wanted to go on an adventure that would make sense as well for my career, because I knew that it would make sense regardless for me personally. So for my career, I identified Vancouver, and this is where I'm based right now, as a very interesting hub, because here you've got a lot of film production taking place. You've got a lot of video game studios. You've got animation studios. You've got VR studios as well. I work with VR, and I had worked with VR before back in 2016 in Brazil. So I knew that it would be an interesting place to go. Plus, there's also the added factor that if we think about it, Canada is known worldwide as this country that is very welcoming to immigrants. And not only very welcoming, but because you have immigrants from all over the world. Everyone is speaking English, but it's very likely that everyone has another native language. And it's, I mean, of course, you can have people that are born here, generations, first generation, second generation, or even farther than that. But it's common, the idea that you have people from all over the world here, either because they're here temporarily or because they're here to stay. It's very common. So I think there's a very interesting sense of diversity, a very interesting sense of this multicultural approach that is accepted, that is part of the country. And it is a very vast country. Of course, like I'm now on the West Coast. There's a 3-hour difference to the East Coast. So you have lots of different cities, all the way from Montreal to Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, etc. It all depends on the field you're working with and what you're looking for. But in my case specifically, because of this multidisciplinary, multi-creative platform approach, I thought, well, there's that. And the fact that Vancouver is known for being one of the cities in Canada with the mildest climate. So being from Rio and Brazil, my natural habitat is at the beach. And coincidentally, I mean, of course, these are very different climates, but still, we do have beaches here. And I do go to the beach and I do go to lakes. And when it's winter, you can also go up the mountain and go snowboarding. So it's there's a very strong presence of nature and a very strong cultural habit of enjoying nature in the city. It's not uncommon to hear about hikes or people that go on hikes. I think pretty much everyone likes to go camping / hiking. It's part of the culture. It's almost ingrained. Of course, there are people who are not into that, but like generally speaking, you're going to find more people that are into that aren't. And that was also one of the other reasons why I thought like Vancouver is an interesting next stop, because there's the multi-creative hub when it comes to the industries. There is the presence of nature, and there are still some elements that are familiar to me coming from Rio, coming from Brazil. But at the same time, there's also a lot of new things to explore. So hopefully that recap helped.
Yes.
You had never.
It's almost like we never left each other.
Right. What are years. But yeah, it's these are the two main areas when I think of the personal aspect and the professional aspect that combined led to this desire of expanding internationally, right? It's about expanding internationally the company, but it's also about expanding internationally personally.
So that means that basically, just for us in the audience to understand, that you basically expanded Fableware to also be with you in Canada, or how do you have to think about this?
Yes, I don't know how deep we want to go into this discussion, but I mean, bureaucratically speaking, I opened Fableware here in Canada as a corporation. And the company exists, and through it, I've provided services to clients in Asia, Europe, different parts of the world. Of course, I still have connections with clients from Latin America and from Brazil. But basically now the hub, Fableware's hub, is here in Canada with me.
I was just asking because I wanted to get into like how many people are working on Fableware. Like I wanted to get into like how the team is set up, or is that like a you thing, or like how do we have to think about Fableware?
Excellent question. I think Fableware started as a me thing, or as in like Arthur's business alias to get stuff done, you know? And one of the reasons why Fableware started actually in Brazil was because nowadays we have like incredibly talented and successful Brazilian game dev studios. But if we think to 10 years ago or more, it's not that there was a lot of budget available for narrative designers or writers, because of course, the smaller the teams, the less opportunity you have for more specialized talent, right? The larger the team, then you can start to hire very specialized people. So Fableware actually came to be, and the really cool part is that I started the company as a result of a creative economy business incubator grant that I won back then. And when I got selected, I said, I want Fableware to be a storytelling studio and not necessarily a game dev studio, because I want to offer services to game dev studios as clients, but I also want to be able to work with other types of clients. So at one point, I even worked on a horror themed water slide for a water park in Brazil. And actually, interesting connection. This was one of the things that I talked about at Quo Vadis, and I was asked specifically to talk about the horror-themed water park experience because, again, it's transmedia, it's multi-platform, it's different, so that it's very unique. So that's how it started, right? It was basically me providing these services and talking to clients in Brazil or overseas. Nowadays, I would say that Fableware is very much project-driven, as in there are obviously consultancies and projects that I'm working only by myself, but a very recent development that is one that I'm really proud of, for example, is a game that we're working on called A Match Made in Limbo. And that's a game that we got funding here from the Canada Media Fund to develop. So that's, of course, a larger team. We're talking about like 6 people. And this project in particular is very experimental. So it's really cool to see that we have the opportunity to seek out funding, to try mechanically and thematically, narratively different things. And at the same time, I'm able to work with this team on that particular project. And then when it comes to other games that I've worked on, for example, I worked on 2 Cobra Kai games. And these were games, one of them I worked as a solo writer and narrative designer, totally in charge of the narrative direction. But then on the second game, I was, handling the narrative direction, and I brought another writer on board. Then other projects that I've worked on, I bring in other professionals as needed. The Match Made in Limbo project, for example, is one where we have obviously programmers, we have artists, we have sound designers, we have writers, game designers. And then that's a different approach because it all depends really at the end of the day on the scope of the project. That's the thing. Like, how long are we going to develop it for? What's our budget? And who do we need to make that reality? At least for this phase of development, right? Sometimes the team can downsize or it can grow, really, really depending on what needs to be developed and in what time frame.
Sweet. This is a very cool style of working. I like it. You basically are on your own if you want to, and then have the cooperation of others. You're very flexible. And I guess that also helped you in deciding that you can just like move to another country and go somewhere else.
Yeah, and just a quick addition to that. Yes, that's very true. In fact, before the pandemic happened, I was already more than used to remote working. Mm-hmm. And it's not that I was used to remote working because I didn't care for in-person contact. Quite the opposite. Like here in Vancouver, I host in-person events. Finally, we're back to in-person events. And for us, it's really important because we host pitching events. So just last week, we have, it's called PVP. It's a nonprofit here in Vancouver and BC and British Columbia. And we just get together all the way from students to seasoned professionals and people who want to pitch their projects. And they come up on stage, they pitch their projects, they get feedback on the spot from mentors, from panelists. They are there to provide guidance. And then, of course, that can lead to people looking for publishers, people looking for funding, people looking for a team, people looking for feedback from the audience. So I absolutely value in-person experiences. But because I was working from Brazil with a lot of different clients all across the world, and even if I was working with a client from the same city, depending on the case, when we're having a first meeting or when we're having important meetings, of course, let's make it physical, in person, present on the spot. But if it's just really a quick sync, then why would I need to drive, I don't know, across town 30 to 40 minutes just to have a quick update? Let's do that online. So remote working for me was never a shift. That was never a drastic transition. Nothing changed from that perspective. Of course, so many things changed on social interaction levels and in our society because of the pandemic. But for me specifically, when it comes to remote working, nothing changed. Here in Vancouver, I also work with a VR studio, Archact. And then, of course, that's a very cool experience because they offer hybrid work. So there's the opportunity to come into the studio to see people in person, or we have like the bigger gatherings, like a summer party or something. And then that's when we can have this physical connection. But again, if you're working remotely, even in the same city, it's also possible to do remote work as well. Or even if it's VR, for example, when you need like the hardware, the headset and everything.
I also really like the style of working and the flexibility. And I think a lot of it, I'm having a sense here that I can't quite put my finger on it, but maybe we can do it together, Arthur. So I guess my key next question is, how did you become a storyteller professionally, especially from coming from a law background? And I don't know, I'm getting a sense in this way of kind of solo hybridpreneurship that there's a big choose your own adventure meme going on. And beautiful. If I'm not completely wrong about this, maybe pick it up but core question, how did you become like turn from a law potential professional into like a creative, flexible storyteller? Because I think there's some sort of exaltation to that, you know. If you can say I'm a storyteller, you've made something right, because it's almost like everybody's a storyteller, but to just be a storyteller is like kind of a special thing. Yes, that's my question.
That is very true. In fact, it leads me to two particular thoughts. The first of them, in my opinion, is that yes, I think everyone is a storyteller in the sense that we are at all times, and this is something that for me became even more clear when I was studying for my master's thesis, because I was looking into philosophers like Paul Ricoeur, and Jean and Rancière, and these were philosophers that were focused on what is the role of telling stories in our society. So, for example, for Rancière, it was always the focus on what is the cultural heritage, what are the experiences that we share because we're telling stories, and that extends all the way to what's the impact of going to a stadium and watching a football match. Well, when you're watching it in person, you have that and going back to the term vibe, that mood that everyone is sharing. And that is a completely different experience than watching it on the TV. And Paul Ricoeur, like, he has a massive book called Time and Narrative. And in Time and Narrative, he explains why stories are so important for people to deal with time. Because as time goes by, humans have no control over time. Time is what makes us old. Time is what stops us from trying to revert events. If a tragedy happens in our life, just as a good thing as well. But if events happen in our life, time is what clearly says there is no checkpoint. There is no quick load, you know, it's only quote unquote permadeath, not to sound depressing or anything, but it's like, it's permanent, you know.
It's very unfortunate about the nature of life, that there's no F5 quick save. Has annoyed me many times, but we have to deal with it. Yes, indeed.
Well, but then, of course, that leads to a series of philosophical discussions of like, is it unfortunate, or does it make us be more mindful and conscious of it? There are different approaches to it, of course. Everyone can approach it in a different way. But the whole idea is that Greek tragedies were built in a way that everything happened at the exact right, opportune moment. The moment that Achilles gets attacked and because of his heel, that's part of the story, and that's intentional. That's by design, so that the audience can gasp and can be and feel desperate at when they're supposed to feel desperate. And at the same time, Augustine was an author known for looking and trying to understand the presence, the image of God, but at the same time, how can we be so feeble and so powerless as humans, and time just goes by and it really doesn't really affect, like, we can believe in so many things, but time will happen for all of us and we can't control that. So stories are a way of getting us to digest and process our existence, which brings me back to the first thought that I wanted to talk about, which is, I believe that we're all storytellers. Yes. But we are mostly, I would say, storytellers from the perspective of detectives, because we're always trying to make sense of things in our life. We are always trying to understand what is connecting the dots. So we absorb everything in life like sponges. We're always absorbing everything in our environment, stimuli, and that can be all the way from lighting and music, which is the mood, but it can also be from an event that happens in life. Maybe you get promoted, maybe you get fired, maybe you break up, something happens in a relationship. Of course, love is not by chance one of the most relevant topics to humans, to us as a society. There are so many songs out there, so many stories out there about love, because it's something that everyone at one point has felt or is feeling or will feel, this emotional connection or even this emotional attrition. So we're always trying to make sense of our existence. We're always trying to process it. But I think one thing is trying to process it individually, and another is trying to process it and share it with the rest of the world. Whenever there's this comparison, and I keep thinking of it all the time, which is when we take a flight, right? And then there's a classic safety guidelines and steps. So in the case of an emergency, notice how you're always told that if the oxygen masks drop, first you put on yours, and then you help other people like kids or your partner or your family, etc. And if I look at that, the way I approach reality is, okay, first of all, what's the personal oxygen mask when it comes to storytelling? What is the sense that I need to make of the world for myself? And once I've come to doesn't have to be a definitive conclusion. We change. We humans, we go through experiences and we can change our perspectives. That's totally valid. But once I come to at least a conclusion for that given moment, then what from it have I learned that I can share with other people? And that's the sharing of the oxygen mask with other people. So that's a little bit of how I approach it. And I think that when you, Simon, when you mentioned this idea of like, well, one thing it is to be a storyteller organically, right? Because we are obviously always communicating, and we can look at storytelling as communication. Really, it's just about adapting and molding how we communicate for different purposes. So there's one side of that, but another is, how can we make this more global? How can we make this an experience that extends to other people in our lives? And there's a line from a Portuguese author, Saramago, and he says, I love this line, which is, all of us are authors or writers, but some of us write and some of us don't, which means, yes, we're all storytellers in the sense that we have things to say, but another thing is actually sitting down and turning that into a profession, turning that into a career. And that's a whole nother step. So now connecting with your question about how did I go from law to where I am right now, the truth is I always loved telling, but not just telling / crafting stories. Even before I could write, for example, as in like actually write dialogues and stuff, I was already, I don't know, I remember that I would write comics, and then I would ask my grandma to fill in the speech bubbles with the dialogue that I wanted to be part of that comic. I mean, for me, it was just fun, right? It was how I enjoyed spending my time. Being the desire of becoming a writer, that was always, always, always part of my existence. But I think that in time, two very important things solidified. One of them was that it wasn't just because I wanted to become a writer because being a writer is cool. I mean, for some people, it might be the writer stereotype is one that throughout humanity's existence is seen usually as the very creative professional, but that lives in poverty. So it's not necessarily one that you're always aiming for. But at the same time, nowadays, of course, when we have different types of writing for different platforms, that also this perspective of what it is to be a writer changes as well. So on one hand, I was aiming to become a writer, or I wanted to become a writer because there was this avenue for creative expression. And I started realizing that, but hey, it doesn't have to be only writing a novel. I have published comics, I have published books, and I'm very proud of them. But I'm very happy that throughout time, I realized that I could also do that with games, or I could also do that with, I mean, it could be digital games, or it could be card games, or it could be, I don't know, an interactive theater experience, or it could be just really, it doesn't, why does it have to be about writing? Why can't I be a DJ and play music for a party? Isn't that a way of telling a story? Isn't that a way of communicating an experience, a vibe, a mood, right? So I saw that there are different ways to tell stories. They can be interactive or not. They can be written or not. They can be visual. They can be audio. And what I also realized was that for me in particular, telling stories was an important part of going back to what we talked about earlier in our chat, waking up on a Monday and feeling hyped and feeling excited and looking forward to something. Because I didn't want to be, and I remember having this thought in school, as in like, what's the point of life? So I'm going to study to graduate, to study to graduate, to go to a job and then die. And like, really, is this, I don't know, is this a point of life? Of course, you connect with people, but we live in a society where there's a lot of weight put on the idea of having a career. And it's again, this is another discussion, but like, is it even fair to define people because of the profession that they have? So I just keep thinking like, how can I process my existence? And again, this is something that became clearer when I was studying Paul Ricoeur, who talks about time and narrative and how we use narrative to cope with time and with the things we cannot control in time. So I think I just eventually realized that, and this is decades later, but I realized that, hey, I'm in that spot where I'm using storytelling as a coping mechanism, and not necessarily as a bad thing. When I say coping, it's not like I'm on a lifeline, as in like, I can't stand life. But if I find a way to expurge my demons, then I'll be able to live another day. Sometimes we might feel like that, but the whole point was really just, how can I look at messages, at values that I think are important in life? And how can I try to convert them into things that are also engaging for other people? Because we are social animals, right? Like right now, this is what we're doing. We're chatting, we're having a conversation, and we, for the most part, enjoy these moments. So if we enjoy these moments, these social moments, They don't have to be, again, confined to a novel, to paper with writing. They can be a chat that you're having at a pub, at a bar with friends. And when you're communicating, you're also sharing these experiences. So how can we connect, right? If we think about content that we consume in our society, what's the big point of people watching the same show at the same time? It's not necessary, but there's a big thing about like, what's a hot topic? What's the show of the moment? Because it encourages connection. It encourages people to watch an episode, and then on the next day or during, I don't know, maybe at work, they're like, hey, did you watch that episode of that show? I love that. And that was super cool because, you know, what do you think about this character? And then that's how we get to dissect, let's put it this way, the personalities and the arcs and the characters and everything that's happening. And hopefully that's how we also get to think of that and make connections with our lives. I like quick, I mean, I know I'm on a super monologue here, so I'm going to stop because I want to hear what the two of you have to say. But one final aspect that I like to talk about in that regard is I consider myself a Papers, Please / Black Mirror fan. And I love this game and this show because they are games which I consider to be critical entertainment. They are engaging. They are very exciting. They're very riveting, but they clearly have messages, right? They have something to say about humanity, about society. On the other hand, though, I haven't watched, and I hear lots of good things about the show Succession, but I haven't watched the whole show, but I've watched a few episodes. And when I watch Succession in particular, it makes me dread humanity way more than if I watch Black Mirror.
As it should be.
Yes, right? It's just, I mean, yeah, we can talk about it. But my point here is, whoa, these are all representations of reality, right? But some of them are closer to home, closer to what exists right now than others. And yes, I think this is very interesting because we consume content, we realize that it is part of our reality, that shocks us, that affects us, and that compels us to discuss it with other people. And hopefully, through these discussions, find ways to not only deal with those factors on a personal level, hence putting the oxygen mask on yourself, but also finding ways to offer that oxygen mask to other people.
Good speech. Yeah, very important.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Yay!
Yeah. Drop that mic. Drop that mic. No, good stuff. Good stuff. I just wanted to briefly pick up the last bit, which is that I love Papers, Please, and both Succession and Black Mirror kind of fucked me up. So there's that. Black Mirror really messed with my head, and Succession as well. Like Black Mirror on like the societal side, I was like, yeah, it's just not that good vibes. And even, well, maybe this reality will arrive soon enough. I don't have to look it in the eye yet, in a fiction, let's say. And then Succession was like, man, I don't need to look at these people being mean to each other. I don't know. I heard it's great and the drama is great and the archetypes are great, but
I totally related.
Yeah, you enjoyed it?
No, just messing.
With which one of them?
Because Succession, no, everything. No, I mean, just because you're saying that you're having a hard time with it, I was just like, no, those are my people. Like, no, yes. Of course, disgusting depictions of people, but I also don't want to like spoil too much about the show for people who haven't watched it yet. So it's always a problem when you talk about TV shows. But talking about TV shows, and I'm not sure if Simon was finished with his thoughts. So, but you also, as I said in the brief introduction, used to work in TV and worked on different TV shows. And one thing which leads to a different question, but as a setup, is that it says that the TV shows you worked on were collaborative TV shows. First of all, can you tell us a little bit about what a collaborative TV show is?
For sure, for sure. So I remember you even mentioned Lazinho com você at the very beginning.
That's exactly how I pronounced it.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Exactly. I loved it. It was, you did a great job. But no, you did a really good job. It's a hard title because it has like all of the different sounds. Lazinho com você. Point is, Lazinho com você, in my opinion, is actually a very, very, very positive opposite of Black Mirror, because Black Mirror is like so dark and grim, and it's the society that's slowly crumbling, and this is going to be our tombstone in the next, I don't know, decades. And Lazinho com você was actually, as a collaborative TV show, to answer your question, it was a show where we, as part of the creative writing team, we would have thematic episodes, but then we would get in touch with the community. And when I say community, like all sorts of creators, from musicians to other writers to editors, filmmakers. And we would say, hey, we have these themes, because we would have the host, Lázaro Ramos. Lázaro Ramos, he's like an extremely talented Brazilian actor. And he's also especially present in the Brazilian scene because he's a Black actor. So he would always have a very strong opinion, and he would always be he's a very relevant representative of marginalized communities. So he would walk on the streets and he would start like just spontaneous conversations with people, for example, about money. And then they would just chat about money, what money means to those people. But then that would be like the on-site, on the street recording part of it that would lead to different types of content that we would collaborate and guide and create with all of the community that was part of this online platform that we had. So think of it as, the best way to compare it to is, it was, in a way, you could call it crowdsourcing, but it was like a crowdsourcing that wasn't just like send in anything. It was like, hey, we have this theme for this episode. It's about money. If any of you have worked on anything related to money, as in like maybe a skit, maybe it's just a small comedy show, or maybe it's a song about money. Whatever you've worked on that is somehow related to the theme, we would have this platform where people could send in their content. We would also have challenges as in we would have questions that would be like, have you ever been through a struggle, a money-related struggle? Was there a time where not having money or having too much money was a problem? And then people would answer these questions, but again, in very different creative ways. And then we would reach out to these collaborators and we would say, okay, let's see what you've done. Hey, there's a possibility we can use this as the soundtrack on the show. Hey, there's a possibility that we can use this as a skit in the show. And on top of that, what's super cool is that everyone that had content that was selected for the show got paid as well. So at the end, after we finished like the season, we would have, based on like the airtime of the content, people would get their checks in the mail and they would also get paid for that content. So it was, and also on top of that, I remember that I hosted a weekly like stream to, again, get to know better who were the most active collaborators, who are the people that are super interested in having their content be a part of the next episode. There was this more of a public approach through the stream. Then we would have sort of like this writer's room approach on a limited scale, right? Because you couldn't have that many people, but we would have like the staff writers. I was part of the writing team for that show. And then we would bring in the community members. And then, of course, we would have the final editing and the details placed into that. So answering your question, collaborative TV show, it's basically a structure where we have a guideline prepared, but we're always open in not just bringing in external content, but we're focused on working with the author of the external content to make it very well intertwined with the original vision for that project.
That's so. I wasn't sure what would come out of this, but I sort of had a feeling that we would get into this kind of area, and I'm happy that I was right. While you were talking, I just remembered, because you also said that you love music. I was so reminded of, do you know the artist Fred again? I guess he's very famous at the moment, so people know him.
Oh, actually, I don't. Now I'm super curious.
During COVID, he had these like collaborative things where people, like, he used bits and pieces from videos and social media, and people then started sending stuff and everything. And then he made music from that and sampled that. And so it's this whole thing now that he's super interactive with his community and with the world when he creates new tracks. So that's something that reminded me of when you were saying like those specific things that you would add into it. So that was just a small add-on. I didn't want to go super into detail, but I just found it interesting. What I wanted to get out of this and where I wanted to go is, it was a small setup, because you are a very narrative-driven person, and sometimes people who talk about this are very like technical focused or whatever. But I actually wanted to put you a little bit on the spot and bring up a topic that is super, super annoying, but also from your perspective, I think very interesting, because you have so much experience with different ways of storytelling. Somebody in your shoes who has done so many different formats and like completely cross media projects, and then you said you had the stream and everything, and then there was so much input. How do you see the metaverse? Like, because I feel like to people who've done so much and like gone to the limits of how different media can work and interact together in telling a story, and how to include the audience and everything, like, to me, that's always what I would consider like something that, if we had a like additional digital layer on that, and then everybody could cooperate, that to me would be at least a little interesting in terms of metaverse, but not all the stuff that people are always talking about. But like, how do you think about this topic, and do you even like think about it at all, or do you think that's a very boring thing and it's over talked?
Excellent questions. So just before I jump specifically onto the answer of metaverse, another example that I wanted to give, when I mentioned very briefly the show that I worked on, the drama TV show, Now Generation, that was nominated for the Emmys. That show was also, for a small part of it, collaborative, but in a different way from Lezinho com Você, just because we had, back in 2014, the FIFA World Cup happening, and this one was actually happening in Brazil. And
we had no part in that as Germany. Please move on. Please move on from this topic quickly.
Is like a stain, a stain. Like, that was a dark, I mean, not for
I wanted to give you an out. You are bringing it up.
What?
I wanted to give you an out. You brought it up. I never wanted to go into the topic. I just said we had no part in it, but you walked into it.
I did. And I do not regret it. Like, no qualms, obviously, what the heck? No qualms whatsoever. But that was a dark day in Brazilian history when it comes to football. The point is, because we had the World Cup, the TV show that was typically aired from Monday to Saturday, it had to be reduced from like an hour to 5 minutes because of the matches. And for a small period, I mean, compared to like how long the show lasted, because we're talking like a very, very long show that airs practically daily. But for like, well, let's call it a season or a small mid-season, we had an app, and then this is going to tap into your metaverse question, but we had an app where characters in the show, in the fictional reality of the show, they were participating in a reality TV show. So it's like a show within a show, but they were reaching out to the real world audience. So breaking the fourth wall, yes, but they were like, hey, we're part of this reality TV show, and in order to get selected as the new CEOs for this company, we need your help. We're developing an app, and you can take part in this experience if you go to the app and you fulfill the challenges that we have for you. So notice how there's sort of like this project happened before the Lezinho com Você. So there's a little bit of a spiritual successor here, in the sense that we started these mini challenges. And when I say mini challenges, they were really mini challenges, because our reference at the time was apps like Vine that had like 6 seconds. So we had this structure where the characters would issue a challenge to the audience. The audience would download the app for iOS or Android. They would then record short videos that were around 5 seconds. We would receive these videos, and then we would incorporate that in the script for the next day's episode. So that was also collaborative, but collaborative in a different way. And I'm just bringing it up because, again, when we talk collaborative, sometimes we might think that there's only one specific structure or model to work with collaboration. But I think there are several different opportunities. The thing is, and this is where I'm going to connect it with the metaverse answer, is that when we have these situations, collaborative or not, we rely on two main factors, at least the way I see it. One of them is the human aspect, as in the creative aspect, or what the social aspect, right? What do people want to do with a particular platform? What do people want to do with a particular tool? And the other is, what is the barrier of entry into a specific technology, into a specific tool, hardware, software, application, etc. It's a discussion in many ways about accessibility. And I think that if we look at the internet, generalizing, of course, there are lots of good things out there in the internet, but hey, like, the internet is a place where people shout very loud and they're not bothered at all in trying to agree with one another or to even listen to one another. So collaboration isn't just a matter of the tool you're using. Collaboration is there an agreement? Is there a consensus happening between people? Because people who are part of the same community might have a bigger chance of agreeing or deciding to work with one another. And if they're not, then that's going to be a little bit more challenging. Then on the other hand, we have the discussion of like, oh, let's take this dive into this new reality, into this new possibility, these new worlds. Yes, that's all great, but how accessible are these new worlds and these new technologies to other people? Like, really, I mean, we might have ebooks available, we might have tablets all over the world, but that doesn't rule out print books. We're in a reality where, yes, there's a lot of room for the VR gaming industry. Lots of games are super successful as VR games. But on the other hand, proportionally speaking, how many people have headsets, right? I'm not saying it's not a valid market. It's a super valid market. I work with it. But at the same time, it is a market that has its space, which is very different when you compare it to other platforms and other technologies. So we have to be very mindful of that. And I think that when talking about the metaverse, we also have to be mindful of who's going to be part of this verse, of this metaverse, of this reality, who's going to be part of this discussion. Are we aiming for wide audiences? Or let's be real, because of the technology and the possibilities and the accessibility, we're talking about a smaller slice or a different, who are we dealing with? So that's the first thing that comes to my mind, honestly. It's like, of course, it opens new avenues. I'm not denying the possibility of the technology, but I do think it's a bit complicated to assume that it's going to soon enough turn into our default standard way of communicating or just collaborating.
Yeah. That's a thoughtful answer, which I somewhat expected.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah. Yes. No. I mean, in that regard, it's not all about the hype. We talked about like hype and everything, because like it almost feels like I feel a little bit bad even bringing it up because me personally, I was quite happy that not every conversation is about the metaverse at the moment. But specifically, since you are so into like the storytelling aspect of things and how to transport a narrative, and so it always, that's the part of it that was interesting to me, which I don't always talk about when everything else is just like, oh yes, and then how do you transport an NFT to another game and blah blah, and that's the metaverse, and like, yes, all right, but like you said, like you're a Black Mirror fan and everything, so I thought from a storytelling perspective, there should be more to that metaverse than just, yes, I can use JPEGs in another game.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point is, It's just that like stories, when it comes to the content perspective, they can be anything. But that's the what, right? What content, what message you want to share. And another is the how. How are you sharing that? And I'm not denying that it's very cool to see the possibility of changing that how with the metaverse. But I do think that we need to always be very mindful of the audience who we're talking to. It's like, for example, I see VR as an amazing, amazing, amazing avenue for telling immersive stories. But of course, if I'm thinking of maybe having a collective immersive experience, depending on the case, hey, it might be better for me to get a room, kind of like an escape room experience, or think of an immersive in-person theater type of story, and then have people physically interact with their environment. Or maybe if I want to focus on the experience for one specific person, then maybe I can think of the most riveting and single player experience for VR. Or maybe because, for example, and we've seen lots of recent developments, especially with the Apple Vision Pro that was announced. But then again, for me, even as a VR developer, one of the main things that affects me when working with VR is the weight of the headset, the physical weight of the headset. And of course, in time, we're going to move on to AR. AR is already a thing, but I mean, like, not as on a day-to-day use as it probably will evolve to be. But I do think that it still creates a barrier, like if on comfort levels, being super objective about it, I'm never thinking of a 3-hour long experience for a VR game or story. I'm thinking of like sessions that last 30 minutes to maybe 45 minutes, if it gets to that, because depending, there are all types of users and then players, and some of them might get sick. So it's just something that we need to be mindful of. And when I say this, I'm using VR as an example, but it applies to any technology. We always have to be mindful of the strengths and the weaknesses. And then again, we talked about hype, as you pointed out, and we do live in an age. I mean, I think hype/hot topics have always been around, but because communication is so fast and agile with the internet, I constantly think of, can't remember what the website was, but it was something like, the best gifts of all time of this week. So it's kind of like we always have the best thing of all time that only lasts for like a couple of days, Yeah. So I do think it's important to let the dust settle. Yeah. And slowly, as the dust settles, we get a better understanding of the potential of what we can do with specific technologies and platforms.
Yeah. Wow. That's so, I mean, now, because that becomes now very pop culture, and how society in general decides what's hot or not. And that's what we've never talked about memes on this podcast, I think, but that's like, to me, another version of like collective storytelling in a way, is like how society or parts of society decide, like, this is now currently the hot topic, the hot meme, and then a few weeks later you already don't understand anymore why it was one, or so you have to have a database of all the memes so people can like reference and see, that was what happened in the world, and that's why that meme like popped up and everything. So like this collective storytelling in form of like pictures with text, which is like super simple but gets everybody on board, and then also makes it easy to contribute, is like such a powerful way of storytelling. Maybe I'm overhyping memes now, but it's just like that's one of the main ways I feel like people are, or at least younger generations, are communicating through like the current memes.
Yeah, sorry.
I mean, I think
memes are the absolute best, and it's very important because it's like there's whole entire worlds can be captured in memes. So memes cannot possibly be overhyped or overstated, because they say you know how they say a picture says more than 1,000 words?
Yep.
Some memes say actually more than 1,000,000 words. And I'm obviously joking, and I'm obviously also not joking. And I think also when we're talking about vibes, visions, then memetics is absolutely in line with that, because just with memes you can do a whole thing. Like I've been a bit quiet now because I'm also like getting really exhausted. Why? Because I've been summer camping for 2 weeks, and I've been hanging out with the same people for 2 weeks. And you all know this: when you hang out with your best friends, you're talking in some sort of inconceivable gibberish, because you've basically everything's already boiled down to memetics. So you're just talking in variety of essences. Like with my oldest best friend, I'm almost solely communicating in music. Like we don't need to talk about our lives or the world much, as long as we're not in trouble. We're just talking in memes and music, short vibes, you know. And so I kind of forgot the reference, because like how you got to this, because my brain's a bit fried. But I can only strongly state how like memes are incredible in culture in general, but also for leadership. I mean, like if you take like Amazon values or something, and they say customer first, or they say it's always day one, those are just memes. And if you tell a story often enough, you can boil it down to 5 words, and now you've like memified a whole narrative. And it's incredibly powerful. And somebody says, I don't really want to, I prefer to solve it this way. And then you say, is it customer first? And the person is like, no, I guess you're right, and like you don't have to explain what customer first means. It's just there. It's mimetic. So yeah, big ups on the memes. I think people should meme a lot more, because you can just save words essentially, and there's a lot of power in them.
Well, memes are part of our cultural history. I mean, memes are just as valuable to our to identifying cultural habits and cultural messages, even if they didn't exist before, right? I mean, probably other types of memes were available before, in the sense that they are symbols, right? It's all a discussion about semiotics. It's like, hey, we have a specific representation of something, and then we also go back to the myth of the cave. But there's a representation of something that it doesn't really matter what it is; it matters what it represents, right? Or what it represents to that specific community. You can look at maybe a shield, and different cultures will have different interpretations of what that shield is. To some people, it can be the representation of a specific community. To others, it can be something that you're going to use in battle to protect yourself. And memes, I think they help us identify not only different phases of society, and that's going to change the style and tone of these memes, right? If are they more witty? Are they more like dad jokes? Or are they a take on something that already exists? Or are they a subtitle for maybe cat pictures or dog pictures? Or are they a subtitle for a scene in a movie? And they're just really twisting and changing what that scene means. So what I think is super cool is with memes, we get the chance. It's like, the way I see it, memes are a public inside joke, right?
Yep.
They're available for everyone, but at the same time that they're available for everyone, they have very specific meanings depending on who you're talking to about them. And even if you reference them, I for example, I love the Shia LaBeouf meme, like, do it, just do it. Yesterday you said tomorrow, don't let your dreams be dreams. And again, like, yes, with the explosions in the back and everything. Yeah. But that's like, how long ago was that? And I still keep referencing that meme. Of course, that one among others. And still it's, I mean, for some people, it's kind of like, what? I don't even know what you're talking about. Or like, that's old. But for other people, it's like, I love that reference. Yes, let's do it. So it's so interesting to see how it's really about human connection, and human connection through symbols that for some generations, for some communities, are more relevant or present than others.
Yeah, that's sometimes when you said like maybe there were memes before this, I sometimes have this thought, if in the beginning, or like, I mean, some people still do it to this day, like my parents' generation used to like send these funny joke image thingies through email. Do you know, like the office email funny pictures? That
Like
was, I'm not sure if that was a
Dilbert
German
and
thing
stuff.
or something, but like you always like, you cringed so much over like, why would you send funny pictures over email? So at this point with memes, I'm almost thinking like, have we become that generation? Or have I become my parents, where I'm just sharing like funny pictures on the internet, and that's just like like the way of communicating? And it's so that people definitely used to share that. It's just a different medium, I guess, or a different time.
Yeah,
You
I
are
think
old.
we're
You are old now, Florian.
Yes.
If
Yes.
you were wondering, I can assure you that you're old, and that
Thanks.
you're an old man with a mustache sharing strange pictures on the
Yes.
internet. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. You either live long enough. Wait, how does this work? You either die early enough to die young, or you live long enough to become the boomer. And
I see.
yeah,
I see what you did there. No longer hero and villain.
it's
Yeah.
memester and boomer now. And
Yeah.
and speaking of memes, unless there's a very important last comment on the topic from your author, I would like to transition into essential questions, because this kind of very nice, easygoing coffee table conversation between us three young gentlemen must come to an end soon. And we have a culture for the end, and it's our essential questions.
Nice. Let's do it. Just do it.
Let's do it. Or as another good, well-known memester once said, "Do it now.
Get in the chopper.
Get to the essential questions now."
Also, disclaimer for the easily triggered people: artists and work have to sometimes be like separated from each other. Memes can still be shared.
Yes.
Just in terms of
Yes.
Shia LaBeouf. Not sure what he's up to at the moment, but the last YouTube video I saw about what he was doing was kind of scary. So
Okay. Yes.
Oh, I had no idea. I just remember once seeing a very
you have
weird.
to go down the rabbit hole now. Maybe I just sent you there, but like he has always been insane, but yeah.
Meme your dreams into reality, my friends. Just do it. So, getting to the essential questions, questions that are simple to ask, not necessarily simple to answer. You could say a small step for the interviewer, a giant step for the interviewee.
Ooh.
So, question number 1, Arthur, what is the purpose of your being?
So just a quick comment. I love that you said question number 1, and we're like 1,000 questions have been asked before, but I understand that it's like the last section. I just thought it was poetic. Mm-hmm. What is the purpose of my being? I think I touched on this like quite a bit, but the purpose of my being is, well, first of all, to process my existence, as in what makes me happy, what excites me. And I think I'm pretty confident of those answers at this point. So I'm not worried about like what excites me, but I wish to share this excitement with others. I wish to share what I think is valuable with others. I wish to use what's exciting for me to keep that as my fuel, so that, again, I can keep going, and that at no point I can feel like I've lost my sense of direction. And it's okay. I mean, even if at some point I do feel like I'm not sure of what to do with my life, or I'm not sure where I'm heading, then I can just, again, do a check-in and make sure that I'm following what makes me feel happy and comfortable. Because I think it's so easy for us to let ourselves be dictated by what society or what I don't know what the world in theory thinks is what's best for us. And of course, we live in society. We need to find ways to be part of this community. But right, there is a, how can we find this balance, right, between what is public and what is private, and how can we make the personal private life happy and positive while still finding the synergy with what is public and social. I know it sounds very abstract, but my point is, I mean, if I were to boil it down, it's kind of like, hey, I was always encouraged to become a lawyer, and I thankfully found my way and I found my path, which meant, yes, I graduated from law school. I even taught copyright and trademarks and constitutional law, connecting that with video games. That was my silver lining, right? I looked at what, generally speaking, society thought would be the best approach for my life. I combined that with what I considered to be my passion, my fuel, and thankfully, I like to say things turned out all right. So I guess the purpose is really just, how do I find this balance, you know? And I think this is a balance that we're always going to be searching for. But I'm happy to say that I'm definitely on a stable, happy side of like, yes, I love what I do, and I just hope that I can share that with other people as well.
Lovely. Thank you. I think that's inspiring. And so my second question is, what inspires you?
Everything, life. I love, I mean, stories, but stories not just on a objective reading a book type experience. Of course, I love reading, I love watching, I love playing. But I would really even change that to experiences, you know, like traveling. No wonder I moved countries. And it's the traveling is like at all times. It's because really traveling, it's so normal for people to say, oh, I love traveling. Yes. But like, let's boil it down. What is special about traveling? And what I think is so special is that even when we're traveling, and I think this is the case with everyone that at one point has visited an unknown location. And when you're somewhere that you've never been before, and you have to sort of like, I don't know, just manage on your own, try to figure out what you have to do, that even slows down time. And the same 8 hours that if you were working from home could have gone by super fast, you're like, wow, this is a very, very long day. I did so many things. And that was because you were like on a high focused attention level all the time. Of course, sometimes time can also go by quickly if you're very focused at home, or it can go by very slowly if you don't understand, if you don't have a clear sense of, there's nothing there to drive that sense of flow of focus, right? So I'd say that what inspires me: stories, exploration, adventures, new experiences, traveling, and of course, let's not forget music. If I want to write, for example, I just put on a soundtrack that I love. Which I mean, to make it clear, I can love a song, and I love dancing, I love parties. So there are different types of music that I like listening to. There's upbeat music, but then there's also very introspective and depending on the mood I want for, it's going to have different types of instruments. And I typically, when I'm watching a show, I'm always paying attention to the soundtrack. And on several occasions, watching a show or a movie, I've identified a soundtrack that I love. And then what I do is I just put it to play, and I put it on repeat. And of course, for me, that's lovely. But for people around me, that can be a bit maddening if I'm not wearing headphones. But I just put it on repeat, and I go into the zone, and I just start writing based on what that music, that song, that track is feeding me. So that inspires me as well. And at the end of the day, I think it's just all about absorbing, but being open to absorbing. I think that's a very important leap, a very important disclaimer to be made, because you can travel, you can go to places, you can do whatever you want. But if you're not emotionally, psychologically open to drawing inspiration from these elements, they're not going to mean much. So if I'm open when I go to a museum, I can find all sorts of connections. I've been like, this is a really cool thing, you know, going to a museum and then just keeping an eye out for things that are interesting, taking pictures. And then later that's something that I can use as a reference in a game. So, which was the case last time I went to a conference. I got the chance to visit a museum, and then I took a picture of like a little triptych, and I'm like, this is so much connected to a game I'm working on.
Nice. Very nice. Question number 3. What's a beautiful day to you?
Ooh, that's easy. But I mean, actually, there are 2 sides to it. So not as easy as it seems. Of course. There's always a caveat. Beautiful day. Is that more of a routine daily question, or is it just like a very open-ended, what's a beautiful day?
It's whatever you want it to be, man.
Oh, I like that. Okay. So I immediately think of like a beach. I'm in the sun. I'm drinking a caipirinha or a Moscow Mule. There's music playing. I'm going swimming. We're playing probably Erling. I love Erling, and the Erling, the artist, is like I don't know, just the light electronic saxophone vibes. And I'm just chilling, and then I'm there with my partner, and we also have our dog, and we're swimming with our dog, and then there's a party happening, and I'm just chatting with friends and just having a good time and just enjoying the day. Probably going scuba diving too. That's a lot of fun. I mean, there are lots of types of beautiful days, but that one is like, yeah. And then there's a boat, and we go on a boat party as well.
What a day. What a
day. Does it have more than 24 hours?
It's a summer vacation.
Nice. Oh, how nice. Another question. What is the change you want to see in the world?
Okay, there are several things that I think the world could do with change, but I would say more empathy. And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm developing one of the games that I'm working on. It's called Match Made in Limbo. And very, very, very short slogan. It's a game where you have to judge the deceased souls of historical figures. And you get to hear what they did in life. You get to see what they did, to hear what they said in life and what they did in life, but you don't know who they are. And you have to pass on judgment because, of course, the afterlife is in shambles. And they've recruited you, of course, to do this, to recall all of the souls and decide where they're going to go. Because in case listeners don't know, about 15 years ago, purgatory was abolished by the Catholic Church. So you have to make that decision. And the whole point of the game, as risque as it might sound, it's really just to get people to think a little bit more before they pass on judgment. Because we pass on judgment every day, and we have to do it in many cases because it's necessary. We can't just stay stagnant. We have to make decisions, right? But many of these decisions come with, of course, a consequence. They come with the impact of us deciding whether something is good or not, where something should get a yay or a nay. And I think we talked about the internet before, and memes are absolutely amazing. But I do think at the same time, our society, or rather internet as a reflection of our society, we're very quick to judge and very slow to forgive. And I'm not saying we have to immediately, at a snap of a finger, fingers, just forgive immediately. But I'm just saying that, like, there's room for more reflection. There's room for more thoughtful consideration and more empathy. So that's why when I think of games like Papers, Please, for example, not just Papers, Please, and if we want to go along more of a dark but serious and thought-provoking approach, there's also This War of Mine and so many other games. But these are called empathy games, right? Empathy-driven games. They don't have to be all doom and gloom, obviously. There are lots of games that are really feel-good vibes. They're just chill. But I do think that we can use stories, and we're talking about games, but it doesn't need to be exclusively games. But we can use, and that's my goal, using stories to generate more empathy, getting people to, before immediately just saying, I hate this, or I love this. It's like, hey, wait. Just think for a little bit more and then come to your conclusions. Like, why? I think why. We don't ask ourselves why enough, as in, like, why am I making this decision? And that's what I wish, just that I think the world could use more empathy, and that more empathy could come from a more mindful place of asking yourself why.
Beautiful. The next question is, how do you contribute to it? But I think you answered it, right?
Yes, I mean, but I can put that in different ways. So, for example, we talked about being more mindful. Yes, I do that. Match Made in Limbo is the game that I talked about, the one where you make the judgment. And again, it's not a game about pointing fingers at the player. It's just about letting the player, in the process, they even create their own triptych artwork based on the Garden of Earthly Delights by Bosch. So it's kind of like, let the player express themselves creatively, and in the process, think about their decisions. But then I also mentioned during our chat the pitching competition that I host here in Vancouver. That's also a space to get people to be more empathetic, because when you watch someone pitching, you have to be very, like, you're being mindful of how brave that act is to go on stage and talk about your project and the feedback that you're getting on the spot. And this actually makes me think of a project, a book that I organized and edited and wrote for a long, long time ago. And this was back in Brazil. And the name of the book is The Player of a Thousand Stages, obviously a parody on the Hero of a Thousand Faces. And the book was a book where I told different authors, and I said, hey, choose a game, think of why that game was impactful for you on a personal level, and don't write me a review about the game. Write me an account, a personal account of why that game impacted you on a personal level. So that was also one of the ways where I choose to contribute to this greater level of empathy, the asking the why.
Awesome. Love it. Very good. If I may comment, I really love the specificity of your wishes, and that they're connected with your work, and that you know they're connected, and that you also talked about change that you're already working on. I think it's so easy to piggyback on existing big topics of change, of which there are many. But I think it's always admirable when people choose their own avenues of change.
And you know
and they
what?
know they're working on it. Yeah.
From I don't know, maybe it sounds a little bit selfish, but if I weren't doing this, if I weren't working on the things that I think are important to me, I wouldn't be happy, you know? So it's like, yes, it goes back to the whole oxygen mask metaphor. It's like, yes, I'm putting on my oxygen mask, and because I think it works well, I'm feeling good, I can share that with other people. But if I weren't putting on myself in the first place, I don't think I would be able to share it, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. I think was it Matthew McConaughey? He wrote this book Green Lights, which is a very fun book, and he called himself benevolent egomaniac or something, which I can also relate a lot to. So I think it's a good way to go. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that also connects, again, I think I mentioned this before, but the idea of critical entertainment. So it's like, hey, we want to create experiences that engage people, because you mentioned the book is fun. If it weren't fun, you probably wouldn't have read it. You know, you probably wouldn't be interested in reading it. But because it's fun and it also has meaningful things to share, then it's a complete package, you know? And what I'm looking for is this combination of meaning, purpose, but with engagement and flow.
Yes, sir. With that said, next question. If you would start a new save game in your life now, what occupation would your new character have?
Excellent question. I love this question. I think I would love to be in a band. I played the piano when I was young, but I love going to concerts. Just love going to concerts. And it doesn't matter if it's a DJ. It doesn't matter if it's a DJ and a band or just a band. Every time I go, I'm like, man, it must be so cool to, and I'm not saying like band as in, it doesn't have to be like this huge group artist that's like worldwide famous and they only go to the stadiums that are like absolutely packed. No, I love going to so many small / mid-sized concerts, and I have such good experiences. I think in another life, and another save file, I would really love to be in a band / be a DJ, and just travel the world and get to share. It would still be sharing, you know, the excitement, but it would be sharing it musically. which is a bit different from my craft. I still, in my craft, of course, if I'm working on a game, there's still a soundtrack, and that's great, but it's a different, right? And then it's going to like in-person experiences with the stage and the audience, and you're talking to the audience, and there was this response. So that would be my, I would like to do that. That would be fun.
Awesome. Last question from my end. Do you have books that have changed you, that you want to recommend, that you maybe like to give to people? I'm offering you a top 3 selection. Can be also less or more. Let's say top 3.
Oh, I mean, it's I really love reading fiction, but given the nature of our conversation, there are a few books that come to mind. One of them I've already mentioned, although it is like very, very, very heavy academic reading, which is Time and Narrative by Paul Ricoeur. But again, I just think it's absolutely fascinating how it shows that we are going, and it talks about specifically mimesis and mimetics, and it talks about how we go through this spiral in society of how we go through this process of we live an experience, we process it, we try to find the answer for it by creating a new story. Then that new story affects society, which in turn creates a new status quo, which in turn makes people react to that differently. And we go down in a spiral. And I think it's just absolutely amazing. It talks about how we cope with the passage of time, how we as humans are unable to change time, but we use stories to deal with those wounds that are caused by time. It's a fascinating reading, although very dense. But if you're not interested in that specific type of dense reading, another book that I read during my master's was Storytelling Animal. And that's a really cool book because it just talks about the relevance of storytelling in human history, right? And in several different societies. And of course, we know, I mean, if people talk a lot about Campbell's monomyth and the hero's journey, that's known to a lot of people. So it's known that, of course, different cultures have different ways of telling stories, and in many cases telling the same story, but just with different patterns. But Storytelling Animal is really about like, okay, what's the point of telling stories in these different communities and societies? So it was a really cool reading. And then if you're looking, so I'm going from like more dense and complex reading to something more accessible. And I would say that a very, very easy reading, which is Steal Like an Artist, which is just a very, very simple.
Austin Kleon.
Yes,
Legend, yeah.
So it's like, I love that book because it's very, it's just like easy reading, but very easy and encouraging and inspiring. It's like, that's the perfect book for like, I want to work on something new, but I don't know where to start. And I don't want to like read again, Time and Narrative, which is going to take up, I don't know, a month or more just to get inspiration. And even it's going to require a lot of like brain processing. And Steal Like an Artist is just like this jolt of energy. And you're like, wow, this is super cool. Okay. This is where I can get ideas from. This is how I can organize my ideas and then start a new project. So yes, Steal Like an Artist. I'm very glad that you like it as well.
Yeah, Austin is a legend. He's a very, very, very inspirational and really has his finger on the essence of creativity. So
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have found it so funny because you set it up perfectly of like, oh, this is so dense and this is not so dense, and then we're getting into like super easy reading, and I thought like, oh, he will say like the encyclopedia of cheeses or something like that. If you have nothing on your mind, like some light reading, just.
Whoops, I guess I failed that one.
Well, question number 1. No, not true. What are your favorite games? Also, top 3 shortlist.
Ooh, okay. So, well, I've talked a lot about Papers, Please, of course. Papers, Please is like a huge inspiration for me. In fact, even in the project Match Made in Limbo. What else? I do love a lot co-op experiences. Mm-hmm. And I remember I just have this such a good memory of playing Splinter Cell Conviction with a friend of mine. just because it's a really, 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 really nice, well told. There's an amazing, like it's good storytelling with the action. And when you're playing with a friend of yours and you're like having to coordinate and plan everything. Plus I'm not going to spoil anything, but there are some twists in the story as well, which affect the perspective that you have on the story from a co-op perspective. So it's not just telling a story where you magically have a second player. It's telling a story that takes into account the existence of two players and creates an arc for them. So that was really cool. Papers, Please, for obvious reasons. It's about the just the processing of empathy and putting yourself into the role of an immigration officer and dealing with the repetitive tasks. Now, let me think of a third game. Well, I mean, I love RPGs, but let me try to think of something. I don't know. Tricky.
If there's no easy thing, then we don't have to make it 3. It's completely fine.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I love these two. Currently, I am playing, and it's just that RPGs are taking they take very long and it's hard to find the time, but I'm still going through Kingdom Come Deliverance. But I wouldn't say it's like top 3. I just like the idea, though, of being immersed in that world. Like the immersion factor is like amazing. So that gets some kudos. But yeah, for now, this is what I have to share.
All right.
Okay, wait. Let me just add one tiny thing. I do have to add the impact that The Sims had for me. I remember playing The Sims like crazy when the first one came out because of precisely the storytelling aspect of you can create your own family, but then on the other hand, you can also dive into the lives of those characters. And then, of course, you can create all sorts of drama however you want in so many layers, right? You can play it very, very objectively and be like, this person's going to be the best at their career. So you can just do everything by the book, or you can just choose to sow chaos and, of course, remove the ladders from the pools. So it's just,
that one.
Yeah, I just, that had a huge impact for me. Not just playing, but in studying games as well.
Nice. Who is somebody from the games industry who you would like to get to know?
Oh, who I would like to get to know. A big inspiration for me for a long time was Jordan Mechner, the creator of Prince of Persia. Because, I think back then to the first Prince of Persia, the process of how it was created. And what I really like about Jordan's career is that he also translated that, not only is Prince of Persia as an IP massive and has been like adapted in so many formats, but he was also involved with writing the script for adaptations, including the movie of Prince of Persia. So what I like about that specifically is that he's also very multi-platform, multidisciplinary. And I love that approach of like, how do we make this, a story that can be taken to different platforms? And another thing that comes to mind, of course, is also Lucas Pope, the creator of Papers, Please.
Nice. Yes, there is a task where we sometimes manage, sometimes we don't, and then it is on our to-do list forever. But depending on what people answer, we will try to make it happen. So now we have 2 more to-dos.
There's
there's no wish list now. At 2 we have to like. If you could maybe also find like. No, that's not how this works. No, but do go on.
Okay. I'll text it to both of you then.
Yeah. Sure. All right. On the other hand, it's always a trade. Who is someone who you think we should have on this podcast?
Oh, how cool. Well, ever since moving here to Vancouver, I met Daniel Mullins, who created Inscription, Pony Island. Yeah,
Oh
and his
my
games are
God.
like very unique, you know.
Yes.
I really like this. It's very fourth wall breaking. It's very different, and it also stands out because he's mostly, you know, like a one man developing team. So, I mean, of course, there are other people that are part of the projects, but it's mostly like his vision and how he executes this vision, mostly through his work, and then with the collaboration of a few others. So it's just, I think his stuff is like really different, and taps into a unique way of telling stories in games as well.
Oh my God, man. Inscription is my top game of the last year and maybe of the last 5 years. The problem is you can't properly recommend it to anybody because
Yeah.
you can't explain it. So
I
you have
know
to
it's
have
a
seen it.
challenge.
It's so annoying, but oh my God, yeah. And I've played a little bit of the Hex, I think, and yeah, he's brilliant. So yes, that would be great to have him, in my opinion, at least.
Yes.
If talking to him is at all like playing his games, then I want that.
Sweet. Maybe it will happen. The listeners, beware. Last question, and this is some self-promotion, of course. Where can people find you?
Where people can find me, it's very easy, actually. It's just my name, arthurprotasio.com. Fableware's website is fablewaredesign.com. But I'm also available on social networks like LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I mean, on LinkedIn, it's just Arthur Protasio. On Instagram, I think it's Arthur Protasio. And if not, Arthur.Protasio. On Twitter, same thing. Facebook, same thing. But to be super, super frank, I think it's mostly easier to find me on LinkedIn and perhaps Instagram or even via email. I'm not that active on social networks. It's not that I don't like them. It's just that really it's hard to find the time, but I'm there and I can be found.
Nice.
Or at events. I don't know, in-person events that I host here in Vancouver, like the PvP pitch competition.
Yes. If we happen to be in the neighborhood.
Ooh, yeah. Well, I mean, you're more than welcome here in Vancouver. And of course, next time I'm in Germany, I'll let you know.
Yes, please. Oh, this will be so fun. I hope to see you at one of the events soon.
Nice. Me too.
Wherever it is in the world.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Nice.
Lovely.
That's the show. Thank you so much, Arthur.
Thank you so much, Simon and Florian. Like, this has been amazing. Again, a very, very, very happy and pleasant surprise. Thank you for the invitation. I loved the free form chat. I loved how we talked about so many important things, but we did it while just letting it flow. We set the mood, we set the vibe, and then from that point on, it just took its natural course.
That's what we do. Thank you so much, and talk to you soon.
All right. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.